Editing artifacts. After the assessment is done, it is important to ensure that it does not contain artifacts. To do this, go to the HRV section in the Results tab. First, let's find out what ECG is and how to read this graph. ECG is a graphical display of the results of a test that records the electrical potentials that occurs when the heart is functioning. On a two-dimensional graph, the horizontal abscissae show the time in seconds, and the ordinates show the amplitude of the heartbeat in microvolts. The R waves have markers, vertical black lines. The distance between neighboring R waves is called the RR interval. Each RR interval has a sequential number above it. Duration of this interval is shown in milliseconds next to its number. Let's check the recording for artifacts. Artifacts are fragments of an electrocardiogram that require editing. They appear due to various factors. The software misrecognized the R wave, interference, temporary loss of contact, client moving, etc. Artifacts must be edited, because these phenomena cause inaccuracy in the calculation of indices and, as a result, lead to incorrect results of the assessment. VedaPulse Professional software highlights most of the artifacts with the yellow color. The following types of artifacts are found. Artifacts markers, extra, missing, and misplaced markers. Physical artifacts, electromagnetic interference, radio signal, poor electrode contact, broken conductor, vibration, etc. Mechanical artifacts, client moving, wrong electrodes position. Physiological artifacts caused by biological processes in the body, physiology of the heart, ventricular and atrial extrasystoles, sinoatrial blockade, atrial fibrillation. Non-stationary periods due to physiological processes such as the client's speech, breathing maneuver, mental switching to internal and external factors, falling asleep, meditation, stress response. Let's take a closer look at each of the artifacts. Marker artifacts. First case. On the section of the ECG tape, you can find that all the R waves are marked, but there is a yellow interval where an extra marker is put. It is not located on the R wave. In this case, right-click on this marker and select Remove R Marker from the context menu. Second case. If there is no marker on the ECG site on one of the R waves, right-click on the wave and select Insert R Marker from the context menu. The third case is a displaced marker. In this case, just drag the marker onto the unmarked R wave, while holding down the left mouse button. Physical artifacts. VedaPulse is a sensitive device. This causes the appearance of various kinds of interference on the ECG. To clear the recording from interference, move the mouse over the interval where the interference is observed, right-click on it and select Remove RR Interval from Analysis. If you observe several adjacent intervals with interference, use the Group Marker Editing function. To do this, click on the icon Multiple RR Marker Editing, exclude RR intervals from analysis. Next, move the cursor over the interval at which the interferences begin, and, while holding down the left mouse button, select all the intervals in which there are interferences. The intervals excluded from the analysis are highlighted in red. Mechanical artifacts. This type of artifacts revolves around movement of the hands and misplacement of the electrodes. Noise on the ECG graph might appear as well. Exclude these artifacts from the analysis. Physiological artifacts. There are several types of artifacts related to physiology of the heart. The first of them is extrasystole. This is premature excitation and contraction of the heart. Extrasystoles can be atrial, in which the ectopic focus of excitation is in the atria, and ventricular, the impulse for which comes from the left and right ventricles of the heart. On the electrocardiogram, the software, as a rule, highlights 3 intervals in yellow, which differ significantly from the neighboring ones in duration. Criteria for atrial extrasystole on the ECG: premature occurrence, that is, against the background of normal cardiac cycles, a short RR interval appears. The QRS complex is not changed, it has the same shape as the previous complexes. Another criterion is that after extrasystole, an incomplete compensatory pause is recorded. Criteria for ventricular extrasystole on the ECG: premature occurrence, just like atrial, a premature short RR interval appears against the background of normal cardiac cycles. The QRS complex is deformed, that is, the shape is very different from the previous ones. After extrasystole, a full compensatory pause is recorded, equal to 2 RR intervals. When an extrasystole is detected, it is necessary to exclude a short interval from treatment, as well as RR intervals to the right and left of it. The next type is sinoatrial block. This is a slowdown in the conduction of the impulse from the sinus node to the atria, which leads to contractions of the atria and ventricles. The criterion for sinoatrial block on the electrocardiogram is extended RR interval that exceeds the previous one in duration by 1,5 times or more. If you see a sinoatrial block on the ECG graph, it must be excluded from processing. Atrial fibrillation is a heart rhythm disorder characterized by the absence of atrial contractions. With atrial fibrillation, the atria are randomly contracted, so only a part of the impulses is conducted to the ventricles, causing their excitation and disorderly contraction. The criteria for atrial fibrillation on the ECG are the absence of an isoelectric line. There is a wavy curve, irregular atrial fibrillation waves are recorded, the RR intervals are not equal to each other but are very different. Unfortunately, with atrial fibrillation, it is impossible to conduct an examination that gives adequate results. In this regard, clients with such a disease cannot be assessed on the VedaPulse device. A special case is the regulation of the heart rate at different periods of the respiratory cycle, inhalation, exhalation. During inhalation, the heart rate increases and the respiratory cycle decreases. During exhalation, the heart rate decreases, the respiratory cycle increases, respiratory waves are observed. This is a physiological norm, and we do not exclude them. In some people, this modulation of respiratory sinus arrhythmia can be significantly pronounced. If single short episodes are observed, then we exclude from the analysis the intervals located in the depression. Non-stationary periods. It may seem that the next type of artifacts is hard to detect, since the software does not see these cases and does not mark them in yellow. Please make sure to pay attention to the next part and memorize it. This group of artifacts is called non-stationary periods. Let's start with the artifacts caused by the client's speech. Their sign is long, gentle, descending slide on the cardiointervallogram. When speaking, the breathing pattern changes significantly. Such areas should be excluded from the examination. The non-stationary periods also include the breathing maneuver. Deep breaths, breath holding, controlled breathing are all breathing maneuvers. A sufficiently long trough-shaped curve on the cardiointervallogram indicates periods when the client was breathing deeply. In the case of such an artifact on the cardiointervallogram, we see normal fluctuations in the duration of the cardiac cycle, which vary in the region of 900 milliseconds. Then the person takes a deep breath in and out. Before recording, the person needs to be given certain instructions. One of the rules is natural breathing without deep sighs. We see that deep breathing changes the heart rate. The average heart rate during the breathing maneuver is abnormal. If the breathing maneuver is a single one during the entire recording, it will be averaged and will not affect the results. However, we see several breathing maneuvers on this record. A large number of them will change the indices and cause errors. What should be done with the breathing maneuver? We turn to the fragment of the electrocardiogram, where it is located, and exclude intervals from processing one after another. Mental switching to internal and external factors, falling asleep are also non-stationary periods. Mental switching is an orientation reflex, switching attention. In the given example, in comparison with a normal, relaxed state in 2 definite periods, the client focused on something. These can be both internal and external factors. A person who suddenly entered a room, iron left at home switched on, yesterday's quarrel with a husband. During these periods, changes in heart rate look completely different. Among other things, falling asleep of the client leads to an increase in the duration of cardiac cycles. We also exclude such periods from processing. In report, we would like to draw your attention to the exception artifact. If on the ECG graph you see an interval highlighted in yellow, the duration of which exceeds the previous ones by 20%, and it does not belong to any of the types of artifacts described above, then nothing needs to be done with this interval. Leave it as it is.